If you have been following my work here on the channel for a while, you know I am a huge fan of Double Dragon. I've been playing this series since 1987 and some of its games easily make my top 10 most played beat'em ups. Even though it's a series with a troubled history, Double Dragon has had some really good games. Others, however, well, they weren't so great. Hello and welcome my friends to The Flying Kick. I am Savino and today we're checking out the newest game in the series, Double Dragon Revive, to see if this is a new high point for the franchise. Double Dragon was never famous for its story, and that hasn't changed here. Revive is yet another reboot of the first game. Apparently that's the only story worth telling, but it does have a few small twists. The foundation is the same. After a nuclear war, the city is taken over by gangs, blah blah blah. One day, Billy and Jimmy are returning to Marion's bar after patrolling the neighborhood. There, they find the bar seemingly empty until a kid no one has ever heard before, named Tin, warns the brothers that the Shadow Warriors have kidnapped Marion. However, the brothers soon discover that Marion actually let herself be kidnapped by the gang to investigate the wave of kidnappings and disappearance that has taken over the city. Like I said, the story has a few twists that I won't spoil here, but I will admit there are even some pretty interesting things I didn't expect. Double Dragon is generally a mute game, so seeing it with a narrated story was a different and very interesting experience. By the way, the story is all presented through very well-made panels, but with little life to them since they are just static images. It's not all bad, but it could have been better. When it comes to the graphics, Revive is complicated. The game has some nice moments, good camera work, especially during specials and boss introductions. Some backgrounds are quite expensive, showing a vast city in the distance, but unfortunately, these moments are rare. Overall, the game's visuals are pretty weak, blurry textures, very simple materials for a 2025 games, and a total lack of interaction with ambient lighting, which for a 3D game feels a bit weird. I mean, Streets of Rage 4 already had this kind of effects in 2020, and we're talking about a 2D game here. The characters don't look good either. Some, like Williams, have a decent design, but others, like Linda and Abobo, couldn't be more generic. Abobo doesn't even look like the big-headed Abobo you know and love, but rather just another big, strong guy who could be in any other game. As for the brothers, well, it's complicated. Honestly, I think they look like they came straight out of a K-pop boy band assembly line. Okay, it's not like Billy and Jimmy have iconic faces like Mario or Solid Snake, but this style didn't suit them. Marion also looks pretty generic, especially after the excellent design she got in River City Girls. That Marion is awesome. The animations are so-so. Some attacks are well animated, mainly the specials, but it's not uncommon to see animations that have nothing to do with the move you just performed happening sometimes. It's not a huge problem, but it looks a bit ugly. The biggest problem here, at least in my opinion, is that your characters move too fast. If you play with an analog stick, you notice the characters have two speeds, slow as a turtle and fast as hell. If you play with the D-pad, only the second option is available. Generally, this isn't something I'd complain about, but since the game has quite a few platformings, running like crazy hinders more than it helps. Now, if there's one thing that turned out really well here, it's the soundtrack. Of course, we're talking about Double Dragon, and as you well know, this series has some of the best music in the entire genre, so you'd really have to try hard to mess something up here. Sure, some tracks here are better than others, but overall I dug the new interpretations they made. Personally, I really liked what they did with the game's main theme. It became more melancholic and somber than usual, which fits the game well. However, I would have preferred a more energetic version, as this one ended up feeling like endgame music. music. Now, I don't know if it was something on my end, but I found the overall game volume to be very low. To hear the music, I had to turn my PC volume all the way up and mute all others. The sound effects are competent. They work for what they're meant to do, but they're nothing spectacular. Punches and kicks have that crunch we expect with that satisfying sound of facial bones breaking, but they sound a bit too muffled for my taste. Some sound effects, like this kick from Marion, have questionable sound effects, but it's not all bad. The impact of the sounds is there, they just could be a little less muffled. Revival also has quite a bit of voice acting. As I mentioned, the game's cutscenes are all dubbed and both playable characters and enemies have their lines during the game. They do repeat a bit too much, but if that bothers you, you can mute the voices in the options. The voice acting isn't all bad. Billy and Jimmy have voices that suit them, and they aren't as overly excited about life as their neon versions, which might be a plus for some, but personally I prefer their cringe style. I just found Marion to be a bit lifeless. The actress seems good, but I don't think she had the right motivation for this role. I don't know, she seems a bit too monotone to me. Overall, the sound here is good. It could have been better equalized, giving an extra boost before being put in the game, but it's nothing that gets in the way. I just wish the game had a jukebox, because it's going to be a lot of work for me to record these songs from within the game. Now, let's finally talk about the gameplay and combat, which is what really matters here. Double Dragon Revive is basically an arcade game with a bunch of story in between. You start the game only able to choose between Billy and Jimmy, but you soon unlock Marion and then Renzo. Revive has 8 stages, each lasting about 10 minutes, and the game only gives you 1 life. When you die, you return to the last checkpoint you passed. It's a strange choice, especially because the game doesn't give you any way to recover your health. I thought it was a bit unfair and most of the time frustrating. An extra life or at least a roasted chicken here and there wouldn't have hurt the game. If you play with a friend, you can revive your fallen teammate by holding a button for a few seconds, which is very practical and honestly really easy to do because the AI isn't exactly very aggressive, but we will talk about that in a bit. On the combat side, you have a pretty wide variety of moves. You have your basic combo to have attacks, a dodge and a block. You can also charge your attack by holding the punch button for a second. This is great for mixing up the combat and works exactly like in Streets of Rage 4. If you press the block and attack buttons together, you can launch your enemy into the air, which is very useful for increasing your combo meter, but strangely, you don't have any aerial combos. I mean, you can hit the enemy in the air with a flying kick, but that's it. And for the amount of time they stay floating in the air, it seems like aerial combos were considered at some point during the game's development. One interesting thing here is how much you interact with the environment. In Revive, you can throw enemies into various objects scattered around the stage, causing instant death. Poles and bars can also be used for some acrobatics, which doesn't add much to the game, but it's fun to watch. And of course, the game offers many different weapons, from traditional baseball bats to more unusual things like paint cans, which will color the enemies, to bags of cement. This reminds me a lot of Konami's Vendetta, which to this day is still one of the most creative games when it comes to weapons. However, despite having so much at their disposal, the combat in Revive feels a bit limited. You can pull off some combos on your enemies, but they won't be long or very interesting. Even though there are many moves, they don't link together properly, and the inability to cancel them makes the combat quite slow. Not even your dodge cancels your movements. In other words, you have to think very carefully before attempting any slower moves, because if you need to dodge at the last second, you won't be able to. The enemies aren't much to write home about. You encounter some familiar faces like Bernova, Bobo, Linda, and those suit guys from Advance, but overall most of the enemies are just a bunch of generic guys. And they aren't very smart. The AI in Revive is very forgiving, and enemies will attack you very sporadically. Of course, when the screen is full of enemies, what is sporadic becomes frequent, but even then, they deal very little damage to you. But in the end, that makes sense, especially if you consider that you only have one life. The biggest problem here is the enemies with super armor. They are extremely frequent. From bosses to the most common enemies, it's not uncommon to see them gain a shield that makes them unknockdownable. This might be acceptable for a boss or two, but when the screen gets full of enemies and half of them become immune to your attacks, things get a bit more complicated. Overall, Revive is a pretty mediocre game. The combat even tries to have some dynamic characteristics, but in the end, you stick to the combo that works for you because the enemies won't demand more than that. It lacks a good feeling when hitting enemies, and honestly, the balancing of most encounters isn't very good, leading to unnecessary difficulty spikes. The game also has some platforming moments and traps that add nothing to the experience and end up just being another boring part you would rather avoid. I understand that Double Dragon has always used these tricks, but I think more interesting enemies are more engaging than some moving platforms. The game only has story mode and a challenge mode where you need to complete a specific objective, like killing X number of enemies in a certain time, but there's nothing much beyond that. You can replay any level you have finished on any difficulty, and you can rewatch the game's cutscenes, but as I said, there's no jukebox, which is unforgivable. Revive isn't a horrible game, there's much worse out there, but for almost $35, I don't think it's worth recommending. There are many better beaten ups out there for a much more attractive price, and even if it costs the same as games like Absolum or even Streets of Rage 4, I don't think the content here justifies the price. On a good sale, it might be worth it if you're a fan of the Lee brothers, but overall, you're better off saving your money this time. Double Dragon Revive is available right now for Steam, Nintendo Switch, PlayStation and Xbox for $35, and you can play locally with a friend or online. And that's it for the video, folks. I hope you enjoyed the review, and let me know in the comments if you're planning to pick up this game. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel for more beaten ups in your life. And now you can also support the channel by buying beaten ups through the promoted links in the description. Go check them out. I will be back pretty soon with another video for you guys, but until then, I hope you all have an awesome day. And remember, keep it up.